Alright, so this person commented this for me to make a video on people hating on mixed kids, primarily some black people hating on mixed kids because of their one white parent, and I would absolutely love to make a video on it. To be honest with you, some mixed kids can have privileges that black people do not have, but some mixed kids may not have it as well. And what I mean by that is that no matter how you look at it, racist, anti-black people will literally dislike you and hate you if they found out you have like more than 10% of blackness in you. To all my mixed queens that have a black parent and a non-black parent, you are a black queen to me, and I will treat you as such. Hold on. As long as you accept your blackness, as long as you're not discriminatory towards your blackness. And to the ones that don't agree with me, you most likely follow Dr. Umar, and Dr. Umar says the same thing. But y'all tell me what y'all think. Deuces.
I want to speak up against mixed race people who look like me, who say that they are black.
So I've been watching her videos for a while and I think they're really good. I'm from the UK and here people know what mixed race people look like, so they will refer to a mixed race person as a mixed race. Whereas in America, they refer to mixed race people as black people. Now the only reason I'm actually talking about this is because I'm gonna have kids that will be half black and half white, and I will tell them they are mixed race. I will not tell them that they're black. Number one, because they will have a white father figure in the house. They will not have experiences that a full black person will go through, and I don't think it's right for them to primarily take up black spaces. For instance, if it comes to roles in films, because then that takes away from a darker skin or a black woman being able to get such roles, when especially they'll be able to take up mixed race roles as well. I do though think it's really sad that a lot of mixed race people who want to identify as mixed race are not allowed to, especially when they just saying who they are, especially if they got a white mom or white dad. Like,
not 100% sure about claiming biracial people that are mixed with black as black people.
So in that video, that girl was basically saying that if you're biracial mixed with black, then you shouldn't count as a black person because you're light-skinned with green eyes. Not every biracial person is light-skinned with green eyes and like 2C hair. My dad is very dark and my mom is white. I did not choose my parents. I did not choose to be born, but I was, and since then, I have been treated like a black person by white people. I've never received white privilege. I've never not been racially oppressed. My childhood growing up in an all-white town was extremely traumatizing. And I honestly feel like conversations like this are divisive.
If you're African American and you come to my page telling me that I'm black, then you're the one with the identity crisis. If you think I'm black, you don't know what black is. You wouldn't know what black was if it hit you in the face. Even with a black mom and a black dad, you're not fooling anyone by shoving your phony black pride bullshit down my throat. If you think I'm black, then you're not black, you're ghetto white. After spending some time on this app as a biracial person, it's important that households learn about mixed races, because it doesn't make sense that kids and people are coming into society not allowing mixed race people to identify as biracial or multiracial. You spend time learning about your culture, white culture, Asian lives, white supremacy, black pride, but you don't spend time to learn about the mixed race. How could you be woke and fucking ignorant at the same time?
So say you were hiring this woman, you know, and because all HR applications aren't identical, but I know for a fact that multiracial people who come from parents or grandparents or even great-grandparents of different races have the legal right to identify, a legal choice to identify with more than one race. So say if you were hiring this woman and on your documentation, in your HR documentation, you know, when it was time to mark her ethnicity and she wanted to be identified as multiracial, she has a legal right to be identified by the federal government, because that's like that's your identification to probably your state and your federal government to identify as multiracial, and you're going to have to make provisions to accommodate that federal right. So like for you guys, you guys who are like basically saying, oh, you're black anyway, that's kind of like I mean, you have no, you're not imposing on her rights federally, I guess, just by stating your opinion, but just imagine, like, federally, she has the right to identify with more than one race because of when she was born, and she was born after a certain generation. Well, she was born after the 1970s movement. You know, the 1970s multiracial movement was successful for them, but she has, this is her federal right to identify as more than one race. Now, whether or not there are multiracial, biracial people who side with one side of their identity more than other, like I feel like you guys are assuming that one, you're actually viewing this thing with through the lens of white supremacy by applying this Crayola theory to people and their phenotype, and you're trying to say, oh well, white people, but you're not white, right? And if you're saying that, if you know that this is a white supremacist viewpoint, as far as like putting all people with certain phenotypes into a certain racial classification, and within this classification comes with all these negative stereotypes, and the racial classification itself does not even acknowledge ethnic differences, then you're not doing yourself a favor. You're not doing the people under these classifications who have inherited these classifications from the colonial era a favor. I'll come back in the next video. I'm about to run out of time. So I just want to come on here and talk about the whole biracial, the whole gripe people have with the biracial youth TikToker and the whole biracial community about whether or not they're black. So I think, like, in this country, we've deliberately been misled and miseducated about race. From my perspective, like, the black thing is something, the racial identity is something that's been applied to incoming populations of African descendants, but it originates in the U.S. from the colonial era, and the racial accounting applied during American colonial and British American colonial slavery. So if you go to the very beginning, so if you go to that, the foundation of race in America, it's based on lineage. It's not based on Crayola. It's not, I mean, it is a pseudoscience. And from the white supremacist perspective, yes, it allows it to be based on these superficial phenotypical features, but technically it's based on lineage. And the whole Crayola concept, the whole Crayola view of race that white supremacy does embrace, it does accept because it actually serves to benefit white supremacy, is something that's it actually takes away from the actual descendants of the legacy of racial accounting for this country. I mean, I know there are racial accounting systems in other countries. The thing is that what the government should have done is to have kind of frozen that racial identity heritage to just the descendants of people from here, and then came up with like a system of, you know, to consider how the racial accounting systems were in other countries, you know, whether or not it paralleled, and to come up with a different, you know, and basically just not allow everyone to assume the racial identities already established here, especially as it relates to black people. And what y'all are forgetting, the people who are saying to this woman that she's black, you're forgetting the whole multiracial movement. They have their own federally recognized identity, and the movement started in the 1970s. So to tell her that she's black and that's it, like legally, federally, that's incorrect. If you try to do that to her, like, okay, I'm gonna come. Okay, I wanted to also add that yes, this whole multiracial, biracial identity thing does actually lend itself to white supremacy, and it does work towards the detriment of people who come from, especially the black identity, especially from the bloodlines linked to chattel slavery, where there wasn't any kind of common there wasn't any interracial relationships of consent across generations. It actually, and the effects of that heritage has been evident, and is evident today. The whole multiracial identity movement does play to the detriment of that. The fact that a group of people have a choice whether it's because they, because we all know that there are biracial people who don't have the stereotypical biracial look, but then there are also black people in history and in present day who don't have the stereotypical black look. So you have a group of people who can pass for other things if they wanted to. They have the disposition of being racially ambiguous. But you have to think about that. That actually supports white supremacy, but further buying into ODR actually also supports white supremacy as well. But what I want you to think about is if this federal government recognizes your lineage, your ethnicity, because the people in this country who descend from chattel slaves, who mostly don't come from this common law, past illegal common law miscegenation, interracial unions of consent, they don't have a choice, and we have a unique heritage. And my question to you is: does the government recognize you, its own people, that are generations rooted into this country? Are we recognized as an ethnicity? Since the racial category they originally used to just refer to us, to ODR us, it now belongs to anybody that is not of this lineage. Does the government recognize us? Do they see us? Are we invisible? We've been invisible to them, but we're in a disposition where they never really wanted to see us to begin with. So if we can get them to recognize us for who we are as an ethnicity, that's what we need to focus on, instead of imposing these racial politics onto other people. Don't focus on them, focus on you, on your. Okay, yeah, you're not doing people who have, especially the people who come from consecutive generations of black identity tied to the racial accounting of the colonial era in this country. You're not doing them a favor at all. You're not. And if that's your lineage, you're not doing yourself a favor. So you have to realize that the government gives them the liberty too, and that's just, and you can't deny them that liberty. Now, there are biracial people who side with one race or another. You can't automatically assume that just because they have a black parent or a parent of African descent that they're going to automatically identify as, for the ones who side with the side, you can't automatically think they're going to side with self-identifying as black. And you also can't really assume that the society that they live in, the people around them who are not necessarily of their race, see them as one way or another, because there was a guest on one of these talk shows who was biracial. Her mother's white, her father was black. Her father was out of the picture. He was African American, ADOS American black. And so her mother was raising her, she was raised, she was well-spoken, highly educated girl. I think she was high school. But her mother was raising her among white relatives. She was isolated among white people. They all loved her and supported a positive experience. And she identified as a white person, even though she had lots of color on her skin, lots of melanin. You could tell she wasn't completely white. But that's just the kind of America we live in. We make this assumption that everything in history and in present day always leans towards the negative and the white supremacist, the negative view of black people and the white supremacist view of black people. But you never know, looking back in history and in modern times, there's a thunderstorm, y'all, how individual experiences have been. You just never know. There's always going to be one or more experiences or lives who kind of they veer off what people expect to be the normal, is what I'm saying. And I'll be back in the next video. Also consider this, like, okay, so you're trying to force someone to identify in a way that you think is correct, but what does that do for you? You know what I'm saying? Because this, we know the racial reality in this country. You're trying to force them to identify as black, but is it more important that you force they abide by this imposition, or that they're actually your political and social ally in the society? Like, you know what I'm saying? People can state there are a whole lot of people that, even among the fully ADOS people, who claim blackness and stuff, there's a discord and like political support of like a collective ADOS self-interest. So just because you want to play Crayola and say that and put these racial white supremacists see the world through the white supremacist view, this lens, and say that, oh, okay, this one drop rule applies to everybody, we all black, that doesn't really help the political case, the political plight of the most disfranchised of black folks, which is most in this country, who are descendants of the chattel slaves. That doesn't help. Trying to impose this idea of Crayola on biracial people who want to side with their multiracial, biracial identity, which it is separate. We don't want to think it's separate, especially when it comes to ODR. First of all, the multiracial movement rejects the one drop rule. If you research the movement and their mantras, and they reject the one drop rule, so it does not apply to them. And there's a lack of education about this in our society, and about race and ethnicity and stuff. And race dilutes ethnicity. It did in the colonial era, in terms of just picking people out of Africa, out of their ethnic origins, into America and say you're black, based on white supremacist view, or Negro, And today, in the newly evolved ethnic, because their colonial era and post-colonial era, well, their colonial era evolved ethnicities as well, and so or post-colonial. So it doesn't recognize, and it allows people to actually appropriate other people's identities. I'll be back.